Okay, welcome to Eid of Shabbat Parashat class, Parashat Vayhi. The most famous beracha which we offer our close relatives and children, and yet the mystery behind it. We all know what we're referring to, the beracha given in this week's parasha by Yaakov Abinu to his son and grandsons, to Yosef, and then by extension to Ephraim and Menashe. And we'll just look at the Pesukim, just to remind ourselves of the beauty and simplicity of some of these words, where on his deathbed, after going over some of his personal history to Yosef, his son, and doing something unusual with his hands, switching his hands, he offers just one of the wonderful berachot to Yosef, and it says, "Vaybarech Yosef vayomar ha'Elohim asher hithallechu avotay lefanav Abraham v'Yitzchak ha'Elohim asher haro'eh oti ma'adi ad yom hazeh." God, who my forefathers, my grandfather and father, made a life of following his path, the same God, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, who has guarded me as my shepherd my entire life. There's no forefather, there's no character in Tanakh who was more connected to Malachim than Yaakov Abinu. And God's messenger, the Malach, that was always there as my personal redeemer. That God, that Malach, should bless these children. In front of him was Menashe and Ephraim, and my name should be called upon them in the name of my fathers, and they shall be fruitful and multiply, you can say. They should be successful, etc. Then afterwards was Yosef's attempted correction at Yaakov's unusual hand placement on his sons, and seemingly flawed in the eyes of Yosef because of the lack of recognition of who the Bechor is, which is Menashe. And we'll bypass that discussion for now. And then and we'll be following, we're in Perek Memchet, chapter 48, Pasuk Chav, verse 20. And then it seems like another beracha, or is it, by Barechem, after he explained to Yosef why I know exactly what I'm doing. Please don't bother me, don't interfere. My hands are in the right place, my head's in the right place. And then by Barechem, Bayamahu Lemor, and he blessed them that day, saying as follows: Becha yibarech Yisrael lemor, yisemecha Elohim ke'Ephraim v'chem Menashe. Through you, with you, by your example, should Yisrael, who's Yisrael, seemingly our nation, be blessed, saying as follows, quote, use this blessing. This is the template, right? This is the generic blessing for everything and everybody. Yisemecha Elohim, God should make you, God should position you, God should grant you the success of Ephraim and Menashe, and he put the name of Ephraim before Menashe. He already also put his right hand on Ephraim, as we know, so he gave him precedent in this beracha. So I have a question, and this is a question that is it's so simple, you even think that it shouldn't be a question. Before we get to it, I think we should just address the fact that it seems like there were two different berachot, and one prior to the incident between Yaakov and Yosef regarding the hand switching, and one following it. I'll just dismiss that by saying that according to the commentators, most of them that I've seen, indeed it's a different beracha. The first beracha was directed directly, as the Parashat seems to indicate, to Yosef. The beracha that he gives to Yosef seems to be a more general beracha, and that has maybe more futuristic implications, while the beracha that we just read seems to be a beracha that's more personal. And according to some, it was Yaakov making a point after Yosef tried to correct his hand switch and the, so to speak, misplacement of the right hand on Ephraim and the left on Menashe, making a point that not only do I know what I'm doing, but based on this hand switch, I'm giving a very specific beracha. So for right now, we're going to put the first beracha in this beautiful place where it belongs and sort of detach it from this second beracha, we'll call it, that we just read. But here's our question. This beracha has become known, as the pasuk implies, Becha Yibarech Yisrael. It's become the generic, we can call it beracha. It's the go-to beracha. It's the traditional beracha that one gives his children, one gives his grandchildren, one blesses a young person with. And here, Yaakov is informing Yosef, this is in the singular, that Yisrael will be blessed with you. And indeed, this is played out throughout history. This has become the tool of blessing that fathers and grandfathers and mothers and grandmothers throughout the course of Jewish history have used. He said it will be used, and indeed it played out. I can tell you that from my upbringing here in Bet Torah, that if you're a homegrown Bet Torah guy, Allah Hashem, our Rabbi Lieberman, at every time they had a Hatan Bar Mitzvah on the stage, he would give him his new book, and use it up, bring it back to me, I'll give you a new one. And then he would say, I'll now give you the traditional blessing. And he would say, may God grant you to be like Ephraim and Menashe, two great leaders in our people. Every Bet Torah person knows that beracha forever. Every Hatan Bar Mitzvah, including myself, received that beracha with his hand on the head. And all his berachot worked. But we haven't asked the question yet, but let's ask it. If you want to create the ultimate beracha, to be used thousands, if not millions of times throughout the course of Jewish history, we have nothing against Ephraim and Menashe. They were pious, righteous, wonderful sons of Yosef HaSadiq and grandsons of Yaakov Avinu. But wouldn't you think that if you wanted to create and fashion a blessing to be used repeatedly throughout history for Am Yisrael's youth, that it would be a blessing, be like Abraham. May you grow up with the blessings of the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Yaakov, or maybe even use their father. He's talking to Yosef, in fact, he was addressing him. May you be so righteous like Yosef HaSadiq. Why did Ephraim and Menashe merit to be the subject of this blessing? There are 12 tribes. There are Avot. Ephraim and Menashe, in all due respect, had a father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather that you can say were more accomplished than they were. Not too daring to say that. Why are they meriting such a beracha? It's too simple, right? So, we have to first, simply in the context of the pshat over here, we have to definitely acknowledge the fact that really Yaakov Avinu was addressing Yosef. And what he had just done, this was a class it was either last year or the year before, discussed, was that the advent of the Shevatim was initiated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicating to Abraham and then to Yaakov. But really, the free reign of how many tribes and who the tribes were to be were given to Yaakov Avinu. That was really his invention. Included in that, in the beginning of this parasha, only a few Pesukim earlier, did he decide to use his authority to make Ephraim and Menashe, to split Yosef, give him, to some extent, the prestige of Bechorah, so to speak, and make the only two of the grandchildren into separate tribes. So you can very well say that as an extension of that, addressing Yosef, all that he deserved, right? It was really deservedly so, that Yaakov, at this special moment at the end of his life, is saying something that is heartfelt and very warm and very deserving to Yosef by his father, and what better blessing than to bless his children. So that's really, if you put everything into context, what's going on in the storyline over here. And yet I believe that our question deserves something a little more in depth, you can say. So I will take two approaches One of them, I think it was just mentioned, so to speak, on the table. But both of them come down to the same bottom line. And that is, if you're standing in the beginning of Jewish history and you want to take a very long-term view at all future families that have future children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and you want to bless them to hit the jackpot, you want their lives to turn out in a fairy tale manner, where whatever you would ever imagine children and grandchildren to be, in your greatest expectations, you would definitely use this beracha. In other words, Ephraim and Menashe are the paradigm of child rearing and of what we expect from Jewish young adults. It's them. And they are the product of, they're also the paradigm of the effort that should be invested in children. That in a nutshell is the answer. The first approach is based on how Yosef had, when he first had these children, back in Parashat Mikhes, when he became the viceroy, he was given a wife, and it says, Yosef Yulad Shnei Banim, he had 2 children before the years of famine came, birthed by his wife Asenat. He called the Bechod Menashe, as you know, and the reason he gave, Ki nashani Elohim et kol amali et kol bet abi, Kadosh Baruch Hu allowed me to forget the difficulty of my past, my torturous past. At that point, it was 17 years. I'm sorry, it was 9 years that had passed at that point. And I'm in exile, I'm away from my family, but God has blessed me and allowed me to put that all in the past, so to speak, in my head. And the second son, in the land of my affliction, the strange land, Kadosh Baruch Hu has shown me great success. So Yosef had named these children based on his recognition of the place that God played in his life. And that was really a foreshadowing as to how he was going to bring these children up. Yosef HaSadik has always been the model for us as to how to live a life in exile. He's been taught most of his life. You can say Hazit, it's 93 out of 110 years, was in exile. He never made it back to Israel. He's the Jew of the diaspora. That's who he is. And what the names that he gave and he crafted for his children, he did his own self-foreshadowing. That's exactly how he brought them up. He found a way to carve out a place of Judaism in this deep exile. He found a way. And it meant that Nashani, it meant that, you had to not live in a depressed manner, thinking of what should be and what could be, and better times, and what I wish. And that was Menashe. And you have to find a way to make the best of your situation and be successful Jews, live a Jewish life, be a light to the nations, and be productive until better times come. Move forward. Don't look back. That is what Yosef did. And that's what his children represented. Can I bring this up without excuses? That's what we do these days. We have challenges, and then our kids take a wrong turn here and there, and we point the finger elsewhere. Listen, difficult. It's really difficult. But can we, without excuses, without pointing fingers, without regret, can we bring up our children as if they were in the home of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and the Holy Land? Can we do that? Can we pull that off? Yosef said, it's not even a question. I have to pull that off. And he pulled it off. And Yaakov Avinu was astounded when these 2 children were presented to him, which at first, by their dress, he was a little foreign looking to him. And then afterwards, when he dug in a little bit, he realized this is a masterpiece. This is a masterful job he did. And therefore, Yaakov, at the end of his life, 17 years later, said, you know what? Becha. I need to give a blessing that lasts over here. The Jewish people will be in exile longer than they'll be, at least in our count right now, longer than they'll have sovereignty on their land. I need to give a practical blessing that's going to apply to every child and grandchild in the future of Jewish history. And I'm choosing to do it through you because you did an outstanding job. It's a stellar just portrait of child rearing. And I like every child to be lucky enough in the future of our wonderful nation to come out like Ephraim and Menashe. The other approach is a combination of what the Abarbanel and the Amek Davar, seven that I'm actually holding now, says, written by the Nesiv. And that is, and this is embedded in the pshat of the words over here, that, first of all, you should know that he points out, it says, Becha Yibarech, not Bnei Yisrael, but Yisrael. The word Yisrael is a very prestigious term given to Yaakov Avinu, Kisarita, Im Elohim ve'anashim batucha. Yisrael doesn't just mean your average person, it means everyone. Everyone should be lucky to turn out this way. And the words are, Yisimecha Elohim ke'Ephraim v'chim Nasher. There's a lot of brotherhood implied over there. And a combination of those two commentaries tells us that these two brothers lived with great unity, without jealousy, despite the fact that there was a stark contrast between them. And really, Yaakov Avinu picked that up with the switching of the hands. And if you go with a lot of the messages in the Midrashim, you go with the fact that Ephraim was perhaps the Ishtam Yoshev Ohalim of the two. And he was the scholar. And Menashe was perhaps, the Midrash says that he was the one, Al Beto, on the house of Yosef, was perhaps the more practical survivor, executive, talented one, maybe business, maybe not. And yet, and their success really reflected in very different results and consequences. There was no jealousy between them. There was no competition between them. They were able to live in serenity. They coexisted. They had incredible dual respect for each other. There was no question. And therefore, Yaakov said, you know what? This is remarkable. I can foresee the fact that my descendants will really resemble this a lot. You can have different factions. You can have different groupings. After all, he's the inventor of the tribes, isn't he? And, there'll be challenges. Wouldn't it be wonderful if brothers can just live together, like Ephraim and Menashe, despite their differences in activity and in livelihoods, maybe in philosophy and in approach? Wouldn't that be the way that we expect Am Yisrael to behave? You know what? I'm going to make this the beracha. My father was fantastic. Yitzhak, Yaakov, my grandfather Abraham was stupendous. But that's a high bar. I really just want the future children of Am Yisrael to be incredibly productive, embrace diversity, and yet not make that a limitation at all on their ability to not just coexist, but to embrace and love each other without any hatred and jealousy whatsoever. And this, therefore, has become the beracha berachot that we give our children and grandchildren throughout history, because we know that they're not going to remain in the home in this cozy, cookie cutter type of form that you hope as parents that you have formed for them. They're getting out there in the world, and they were going to take different routes in life. Let them do that. Let's embrace that. At the same time, let them coexist and have Achdut and Ahavat Yisrael, and let this be also possibly the solution for eventually getting out of this galut. Living out the motto of Ephraim and Menashe, as our Lieberman would say, two great leaders in our people. Amen.